Shirley Heapy from South East region of Wish, and my fellow board member Lauren Chivers is just monitoring to see how many people we've got coming in. It's all going well. That's always good.
Just people keep joining at the moment, Shirley. So just
yeah. Okay. We'll just keep. We'll wait.
Which is good news.
Yeah, it is. It is. I know. I was very worried about my internet first thing, but it seems to have settled down now. So hopefully it'll be okay for everybody.
Okay. It's like popcorn. As soon as it starts getting slower, then we'll start. But okay.
Right. Fantastic. Nice to see everyone coming in. Looking forward to getting started. We'll just wait for a few more to get registered. We've got quite a few joining us today, nearly 100 delegates. Waiting now, still a few more coming in. This is great. We'll get started as soon as we can. Just wait for a few more to get logged on. Right, so Lauren, I think I'll start with the welcome and introduction now. So I think we've got nearly half of our delegates are logged on now. Just want to say good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We're at the Wish South region, Wish South East region. Are delighted to be hosting the first.
Oh. I think that's Shirley's internet that's gone down there. We'll give her a couple. We'll give her a minute to come back, and if not, then jump into the next part. No, I think she's gone. Okay. Melissa, do you want to do the introduction, or should I move into the agenda?
I knew you were going to say that. I mean, I'd love to say that the email that she sent me, just in case this happened, has landed, and it hasn't. But the good news is that I've got a fantastic board that can jump in and just to help me and rescue me in my time of need. So I think she was just going to sort of say a little bit of housekeeping. So everyone's been amazing, and you've already put on your mute. So thank you very much. And it's lovely to see your cameras on and see all your, happy, smiley faces. Again, like I said, I haven't got the bullet points from Shirley, so bear with me. But the good news is, and one of the things I'm really, really proud to say is that we don't have too many slides today. We've got one slide and one slide only, which I know for me, I was really happy to hear. So that means I get to see all your faces the whole time. So housekeeping, mute, phones off if you can. If not, don't worry, you're not in the room with us. But I think over to Lauren, really. We might as well get started. We've got some fantastic speakers.
Well, hello everyone, lovely to see you today. What I'll do is I'll share my screen and just take you through the agenda, and just so there's no surprises and we know how the hour and a half is going to play. So I'll quickly do this, and this will be the only time that we're sharing our screen, and then we get to see everybody's lovely face. So I'll quickly do that now. Okay, so hopefully you can all see this at the moment. This is the agenda that we're going through. So we was meant to have a welcome with Shirley, but Melissa's thankfully stepped in for us. So moving on from that, what I'll do is I'm going to give a quick introduction to Teresa, who's a partner at Charles & Hamlins, and she's going to be taking us through building new building and safety regulations. And then following that, we're going to have a quick networking session, so you'll all be put into different rooms, and then you can kind of discuss the topic that we've just gone through. And then after that, we'll come out, and then you can do a quick Q&A for Teresa, questions that might have come up. And then what will happen is then I'll introduce you to Steve Nunn. He's going to be taking us through building safety again, but from client's perspective, and the future of shared ownership. And then the same layout will happen again. So we'll go into breakout rooms, you'll do networking, and then we'll have a quick Q&A before we pass over to Melissa. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so then I can see you all again. Hello. Okay. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Teresa. So Teresa is a partner at Charles and Hamlins. And for those of you who don't know who Charles and Hamlins are, they're an international law firm who have over 150 partners. So Teresa started with Charles and Hamlins in June 2010 and then was promoted to partner in 2015. So she has extensive experience of acting on both employers and contractors, so she can see both sides of the coin. And she's actually opened one of our Southeast events in the past. I think it was our first ever Southeast event in 2019. So I think she's back by popular demand, if anything else. Yeah, I'm going to, without further ado, pass over to Teresa.
Oh, thanks very much, Lauren. Poor Shirley, everyone. Isn't that a sign of our times? I mean, literally, in a few years, I assume we'll all be laughing about this. It's just so typical that when it's your turn to speak, you get cut off, honestly. But yes, thank you so much for the introduction and the opportunity to speak. Obviously, I'm standing in for my colleague, Rebecca. And I thought what would be helpful is if I just explain my journey with Wish. I am actually a London board member of Wish, and I joined Wish. I was a trainee solicitor, and basically I've been a member of Wish through my whole career journey, really. And one of the things that's really struck me about is that obviously we are all members because of our commitment to the sector, and the special aspect of that being, of course, all out here for our belief in social purpose and social value, and the value of housing and having safe and decent housing for everyone. And that's our sort of passion, and I think that's what unites us with Wish. And I think that part of that meant that all the events I go to with Wish, be they the educative ones, be they the inspirational ones, the vibe and the atmosphere is always so welcoming, so inclusive and really fun. And we always seem to get an eclectic mix of people in a very senior roles and people in very junior roles, all different aspects of the sector. And so for me, I'm just a huge fan of Wish, and I would really encourage, all of us to try and cajole the next generation to come along. And let's have more and more young women coming to Wish events, because I found it really good. And, and I think one of the things about, all of us in the sector, we are facing similar issues. And, be it you work for a contractor or a developer or a social developer or a housing association, we're all facing similar issues. And actually, it's really helpful to have that sort of collaboration and understanding. We go to events, you start talking about something, other people will have a shared experience. And I found that really, really valuable. So, without hesitation, I would helpfully, help Wish on anything. And, as a firm, we also are good friends of Wish, and we sponsor a lot of events because we believe in what Wish does. So yeah, all good on that sense. What we're talking about today, or what I'm talking about today, is the building safety reforms. This is something that we've all been talking about in the industry generally, in construction and housing, for a while, of course. And it's something that is absolutely central to everything that we will all be doing going forward. They do anticipate that the bill will become law this summer. That seems to me extremely ambitious, but that is the position that's being taken at the moment. So it is really important for us all to understand, in broad terms, what's going on and what's going to be expected of us. Now, just to give you a bit of background, if that would be helpful. So, of course, we all know where this has come from. This has come from the tragedy of the Grenfell Tower fire. As soon as that happened, what basically then went on was a huge consultation process with lots of different organisations, including Trowers, and there was the independent review of the building regulations and fire safety led by Hackett. I think all of us will know about that. The final report that was produced was extremely damning. It was the Building a Safer Future, and that has led to a whole, raft sort of inquiries, soul searching, looking into organisations, education, and that basically highlighted there is a significant amount of ignorance in the sector about fire safety, indifference. a lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities, and inadequate regulatory oversight and enforcement tools. So, you know, you don't get much more serious than that. And it is actually quite rare to come across reports that put those kinds of, you know, put wordings that strongly out there. And I thought what would be helpful is when we talk about, you know, the building safety reforms, I'll try and give you some anecdotal evidence or, you know, examples of cases that I've worked on that will really bring home why this is needed. Because my practice is contentious construction, so I deal with anything to do with, you know, if clients don't like the look of a provision of a contract, all the way through to running cases to the Court of Appeals, Supreme Court, so the whole spectrum. Sometimes we work with clients on site looking at, you know, if they're preparing to go to commercial meetings or they're negotiating something or something's arisen on site. Sometimes we dip in and out in the background and no one knows we're instructed. And then sometimes they'll be saying, you know, this cladding is coming off this building, we need to recover the cost, help us. And it literally can go from one extreme to the other. So what this building safety bill as it is still now is meant to be doing is it's meant to be creating a more effective regulatory and accountability framework to provide some oversight of the building industry. It's meant to introduce clearer standards and guidance. It is also meant to put residents at the heart of a system of building safety. So that's something that all of us certainly buy into. And it's meant to create a culture change and more responsible building industry. So that's another key facet to this. I think one of the issues that we've all noticed in the sector is almost regardless of the contract that you pick, now the non-contentious lawyers will not like me saying that, but regardless of the contract that you pick, it's about attitude, isn't it? It's how you choose to approach it. And everyone can be clever, everyone can try and make points and take positions. But if we actually want to achieve the goals that the Building a Safer Future, you know, reforms are meant to achieve, we'll all have to work together and be collaborative, because the way that the contracts are drafted won't necessarily always match up with what then unfolds. And obviously some projects are in progress now. So, you know, the law will come in and they will already be in progress. And also, aside from all of that, we will want our residents to really believe and be right that they're safe in their own homes. That seems to me such a basic human right, isn't it? I mean, to believe and not be going to bed with a waking watch outside, being fearful, that must be the most awful situation to be in. And so none of us want that. So we've got to find a way to work together to get it. And that's really what the Building Safety Bill is trying to enforce, but it will take attitude change as well. So, you know, that's the clear objective of the bill. Now, the bill, I don't know if any of you have had the pleasure of reading it. We have many times, and these things seem extremely, I guess, intimidating at first, but seriously, don't be intimidated by these things, because basically it's just a huge document that's split into different parts, and the different parts are meant to deal with different aspects to it. So, for example, you get an introduction. What's this all about? Well, we can all get on board with that. The second part is where it becomes interesting. It then dictates what the regulator is meant to do and the functions. So it contains provisions about what the building safety regulator is meant to do in relation to buildings, and it also contains definitions of buildings at risk, high-risk buildings. So that's what we all need to keep an eye on. Then what you get at part 3 is a Building Act. So that's where this act is going to amend previous legislation. And at part 4, it talks in detail about higher risk buildings. Now, one thing to note about higher risk buildings is that the Secretary of State can actually redefine what are higher risk buildings. So at the moment, I think a lot of us have been fixated on tall buildings and multi-occupied buildings and buildings that can be also student accommodation and so on. But we do need to bear in mind that that could change, and that could change because of government research or that, you know, new evidence that comes to light. So, or you know, developments in construction products. So just bear in mind that that could change, and that will be important. And then you get into sort of part 5, which is supplementary things, just generally other elements that are relevant to the implementation of the Act. And then you go through schedules. And I won't go through all that, but basically what I'm trying to get across is that the information contained within these documents initially seems absolutely ginormous, and how on earth can we as an organisation get to grips with this? But actually, when you break it down, there is logic to it. So the thing that we've got to bear in mind, of course, is buildings that are in scope. So what are they? So as I've said, the multi-occupancy, residential, student accommodations over 18 metres or 6 stories in height. And as I say, this can be amended. And the building safety regulator, that's something that everyone as well is interested in. That is going to be established within the HSC, and that will have the oversight of the system and the powers of enforcement and sanctions. So basically what we'll be looking for is the regulator will have powers of things like they will be able to issue compliance notices. So this will be when something isn't compliant and demand that it's rectified within a particular time frame. And also when the works are ongoing, the regulator will also have the power to issue stop notices. So it can literally stop a project in its tracks and require work to be halted until a serious issue of non-compliance has been addressed. Now that's a really important point. So if any of you are involved in development, that is something to really bear in mind, because who bears the risk of that is going to be an obvious issue where disputes could arise, because literally there's no going back from that. The regulator can stop you, and then who is at fault for any delays or cost consequences as a result. So you can immediately see where things could become difficult. And failure to comply with a compliance and stop notice will be a criminal offence. So this is really where it's starting to get serious, with a maximal penalty of up to 2 years and an unlimited fine. So some commentators have said this, these sanctions aren't strong enough, but I guess the point will be that they are available to the regulator, and it's a question of let's see if they'll use it. And I think that they will, certainly with fire safety matters. So in terms of the duty holders, so where does this sit? Who is responsible? So in the design and construction phase, the duty holder roles will be aligned with designer, principal contractor, much like we've seen with CDM. So we'll all probably do that. During the occupation phase, which is what a lot of our clients are particularly interested about, is the accountable person and the building safety manager. So the accountable person is, as I guess, the way I would put it is they're the legal owner of the building. And then they building safety manager. And the accountable person will be responsible for the building assurance certificates. So this will include the existing buildings that are occupied. This will include the assessment of the building safety risks and structural risks of the building. And this will involve preparing resident engagement strategy for promoting the participant of residents in managing building safety decisions. So I think one of the things that really came across and is coming across in the Grenfell inquiry was that residents didn't feel like they were being listened to, and they didn't feel they had a say. And that's an important point. This is meant to address this. And the building safety manager is managing the building in accordance with the safety case report. I think I'll just talk a little bit about the gateways, and then I thought what I could do is then just give you some anecdotes. So the gateways is the way that the bill is seeking to, I guess, compel compliance through the design, construction and occupation, I guess, to the occupation phase. And the reason for this is because a lot of buildings we find, people will do, there has been a habit, and it has been driven by cost, for people to do the bare minimum. So organisations to do the bare minimum, or contractors, subcontractors to do what they think is required of them at the time, and then that's it. We've done our bit, here you go, you crack on. And there has been a real issue of information as well. So, a building's been built years ago, nobody knows who dealt with that bit. You go off and deal with it. And when you discover problems and when you try and investigate the problems, you would be surprised at the lack of information that's available to you and the lack of as-built data that's available. And, just knowing simple things like, what is the composition of the cladding? Seems like it would be a quite basic question, believe it or not. It isn't sometimes. So what this legislation is trying to do is force you through gateways that require compliance, which will mean that if an issue does arise, it will be so much easier to get to the bottom of it quickly. And actually, by complying with the gateways, you probably head off a lot of the problems. So that's what this is all about. So you have Gateway 1, which is to do with planning. That's all about what information will have to be presented to the planning authority with the application that demonstrates your fire safety requirements, the impact on any other considerations are being dealt with and being incorporated with any other proposal. So it makes sure that you have this in the forefront of your minds when you're going for planning. So Gateway 2, so, you know, dealing with the sort of bits before construction, you need to actually submit key information to the building safety regulators to demonstrate the building once built will comply with building regulations. And then in Gateway 3, you get to the final certificate completion stage. You will be required to submit all your information to the building safety regulator, prescribed documents, and the final as-built data. And the idea is that, you know, this information that's provided as part of the building safety case. It's going to be like, I sort of compare it to almost like a living document that lives with the building. Because again, this has been a big problem in disputes where, or even, and it's been loud and clear with the Grenfell inquiry, trying to find out what actually went on and why is a really, really difficult task after the event. And so this idea of a sort of living building safety case is to get around that very problem. So that's what I thought I'd highlight to everyone. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of cases I've worked on where this is which prove really to me why all this is necessary. So we worked on the first litigation that was due to go to trial post Grenfell, and this claim was issued almost immediately after the fire, and it was multi-party. So there were 6 parties, each party had their own expert. It was listed for a trial that was meant to last a month. The costs of the parties were running at around £1 million each. This didn't even include the damages claims and the remediation claims. And of all the experts that were instructed, none of them could agree what the composition of the cladding panels were, because the information provided around that was so sketchy that it wasn't really clear. And what they had to do was basically dismantle this building and try, years after the event, to try and establish what on earth was on there. And so what you ended up finding was there wasn't just issues of design and who took responsibility and whether or not architects had approved certain things. It was issues of workmanship. It was their fire stopping? Was the installation okay? You know, were there other issues with the sprinklers working? You know, it literally turned into what started off as an initial inquiry into a multifaceted, multi-million-pound dispute. And, you know, pretty much prospects were established to be a coin toss. So that really just, I think that example just really brings home that it is that problematic, and that is why this legislation is really driving parties towards what it's doing. Another case that I can explain is that one situation where what's happened is the client has, over a course of years, discovered more and more highly dangerous fire safety defects within a big residential building. And it's very difficult to understand what went on during the construction phase at all. And there is no way this client could have known about it, anticipated it, doesn't even know where to start in terms of investigations. And so again, that is what, you know, why this golden thread concept has been borrowed from other sectors in terms of the building safety case. Because if this client could have gone into, you know, the building safety case, reviewed assessments that were taken out, looked at as-built drawings, looked at this, you know, progress of the works, sign off of the works, this could have made it a lot easier. And, you know, the client is going to be spending, you know, hundreds of thousands of pounds on technical experts trying to piece together what went on in construction. And so that is another reason why, you know, this legislation is the way it is. It's meant to head off at the pass massive issues like that, which are costing clients in the sector so much money. So yeah, so that's really what I wanted to canter through in terms of building safety. Lauren, Melissa, what do you want to do? Do you want to do questions, or do you want to break out?
So I think, by the way, thank you, Teresa. I thought that was amazing. I think we're going to move into breakout rooms now, aren't we? And then I think Emmeline's going to sort this out. She's in the background, everyone. Feel free to turn your cameras on. You know, I want to see your faces, say hello. And we're going to move into breakout rooms, and then we'll have about 10 minutes in there where we can kind of discuss what Teresa's just taken us through, and then when we come out, everyone can ask their questions. So yeah, I think that it should pop up any minute. Emmeline, I'm going to pass over to you. Drum roll. There we go. Okay. Hello, everyone. Are we all back? We'll wait for the rest of the room to come in. I can see more people are joining. It's okay. Hello, hello, hello. Just bringing everybody back. Brilliant. Well, I think the screens are still moving. I'll give it a couple more seconds. Okay. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that. All into your breakout rooms, getting to meet people as well. I thought it was really lovely to, especially in my group, we had a really good, really nice discussion. And I know that there are questions for Teresa, so be ready. So who would like, I guess, to go first? It's an open floor, so yeah, whoever wants to go first with their questions, please raise a hand or let us know.
Lauren, I don't have a question, but I just noticed that there was some time left on the clock, so I don't think everyone came back at the same time. So some people might have missed part of what you said there.
Okay, it's all right. I'll start again. That's no problem. So yeah, we're just I hope everybody enjoyed your breakout session that you were in, and I know that there were some questions left for Teresa. We had some really good topics in my breakout room. So if anybody has any questions, this is the time to ask. The floor is open for Teresa. So yeah, if you've got any questions, please raise a hand and we will pass over to you. See if I can see anyone. Oh, come on, there must be some questions. I mean, we had some in. Oh, hello. Maggie. Oh, sorry.
No. Okay, no, we were wondering, hello everyone. It was really interesting actually. And it was, first of all, it's great to see so many people. But the question, Teresa, actually, how do you define the legal owner? Is it the freeholder, the leaseholder? What do you do in a mixed use building? What do you do with shared owners?
That's a great question. Basically, the way that it's been defined is that it's basically the accountable person is the one that has the legal interest in the property. But you're quite right that one of the questions that's been raised by the G15 and the London boroughs is what actually is going to happen when you have many organisations that own a building, including ones that may be overseas investors. So that is something that we need to keep an eye on, because that question has been specifically posed to MHCLG, because one of the worries is, what are we going to do with buildings that are partly owned by entities here, partly owned by overseas entities, and where will the responsibility lie?
Okay. Lynn, I believe you're next. Your hand is raised, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. Sorry, it took me a minute to find the hand function, so apologies. Yeah, just one of the things we discussed in our group was around the resident engagement strategy. Obviously, the concept of it is amazing and great and exactly how it should be. But there's probably not an answer to this, but it's more about, we wondered how it would actually work in practice. So how, would organisations seek to engage their residents? How would they make sure they got a fair balance of representation, I suppose, and how they would function throughout the whole life cycle of that building development?
That one is, I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is that I know that the early adopters of this are working on that. So they're working on two things. They're working on that, and they're also working on the building safety case, which is something we were talking about in our breakout room. And so I could try and put you in touch with them if you like, because this actually came up. And one of the really positive things was that they're very willing to share information and what they've worked on so far. So I can definitely put you in touch with people.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just so everyone knows how to do it. It's the little reactions button on the bottom of your screen, and then if you click that, press raise a hand, because I was struggling to find it as well. So it wasn't just you, Lynn. So does anyone else have any more questions? No? Can't see. No? Okay, all right So if everyone's sure they haven't got any more, I'm going to move on then. And the next stage of our event is introducing Steve. So Steve Nunn, he's our second speaker. He's the Executive Director of Development at Moat Homes and has been since 2009. So Moat Homes, if no one knows, is a leading housing association owning and managing over 20,000 homes in the southeast of England. Steve has in-depth knowledge about shared ownership, development, sales and marketing, and leasehold management. So without further ado, I will be passing over to Steve. Steve, wherever you are, there you are.
Thanks, everybody. Can you hear me? Sorry, I literally just lost my connection, so fingers crossed. Okay, thanks for inviting me along today. It's a real pleasure to be here at the first National Wish event. Moat are really big supporters of Wish, and I know there's a number of the Moat team here today. So when Lauren and Shirley asked me to come along and talk to you today, I couldn't really refuse. Particularly probably as shared ownership is my chosen specialist subject. So as Lauren said, I've worked at Moat in development and shared ownership for the past 12 years, and I've worked in housing since 1990, and pretty much for that whole period I've been involved in shared ownership in one way or another. And I guess for my sins, I've been involved in a whole number of shared ownership reviews over the years, dating right back to the Housing Corporation, the Audit Commission, through the Homes and Communities Agency, and now Homes England, and even the GLA, I think, at some point. And I think it's interesting that until now, shared ownership has remained largely unchanged. So I think it dates back as a tenure, probably just before my time, so the late 80s, but it hasn't really changed at all until this point. And I think probably, obviously worked in housing for a long time, would probably admit that shared ownership isn't perfect. But I'm a great advocate of it, and I think it's had an important role to play and continues to have an important role to play as a tenure. And that are levelled at shared ownership, are the same criticisms that actually you could level at leasehold in general. And some of the issues that you hear talked about in the press in particular, they often focus right in on shared ownership. A lot of the cladding debate at the moment, they talk about housing associations alongside the cladding issues and who should pay. But those issues in my mind are leasehold issues, and are, as I say, equally as pertinent whether you're a shared owner or whether you're an outright flat holder of a leasehold tenure. I guess in my view, shared ownership has a real role to play, because what other choices do people who buy shared ownership, who have intermediate incomes, what other choices do they really have? I mean, they're priced out of the outright sale market. They're not in circumstances that would enable them to access scarce social rented housing or affordable rented housing. So what's left? What's left is private rented. And of course, what you have with private rented is, you run the tightrope of a 6-month or 12-month assured short-hold tenancy, with no guarantee that that's going to be renewed at any point, and probably paying the same cost, if not more, than you would be paying if you were a shared owner, when you add your sort of monthly costs together of mortgage and rent. So, in my mind, shared ownership is here to stay. It has a real place. But it's fair to say we are about to see some changes, say for the first time in just over 30 years. So I think at the beginning, we said I was going to talk a little bit about health and safety and shared ownership. I'm not actually going to focus at all, really, I think, on health and safety, because I think Teresa expertly covered that. And I'm happy in the Q&As to talk about health and safety and shared ownership and leasehold from a practitioner's perspective. But actually what I'll do here is just concentrate on the changes that are coming, and what they might be and how they're going to impact on housing associations, but also on shared owners. So we heard in the autumn the announcement for the new 2021-2026 affordable housing programme, and I say that's going to bring with it the sort of biggest changes we're going to see in shared ownership since the late 80s. I suppose as I go through what those changes are going to be, it needs to be seen within the context that there was a pre-Christmas consultation on what these changes might be and the shape of these changes and the parameters that they're going to sit within. So some of this is going to be a bit of guesswork. We've been promised the outcome from that consultation and a new model shared ownership lease now for the past 6 weeks or so. We've been told it's imminent. It still hasn't arrived. I was fully expecting it to arrive 15 minutes before I started talking, because that would throw everything I was going to say out the window, but it hasn't yet. So keep your eyes on your inboxes, because it's coming our way. So I guess in terms of the changes, there are three major things and then some tweaks around the edges. So in terms of the three main things, the first one is a proposed change in terms of responsibility for repairs and maintenance for the first 10 years life of the shared ownership lease. And that to me is a real game changer. It's a real headline grabber, a real fundamental change in how shared ownership works, because as I'm sure you all know, currently shared ownership operates on a full repairing lease. And I think it's interesting, since they made that announcement back in the autumn, the stance appears to have softened a little bit around what that actually might mean. And certainly the parameters were confined more in the consultation paper. So I think initially they were talking about the landlord, the housing association, being responsible for all of the repairs in exactly the same way as we would be for any social rented or affordable rented tenant. But the discussion now seems to have moved on a little bit and is now centering around what may or may not be included in terms of the repairs obligation. And from what I'm hearing now, they're going to be focusing pretty much on the big ticket items. So heating systems, boilers, kitchens and bathrooms, maybe windows and doors, rather than the sort of whole gambit of repairs, which is helpful. And now there's also talk about an annual cap on the costs that can be reimbursed to a shared owner. So the consultation talked about somewhere between £250 to £750 per year, but with the view that we're probably going to land somewhere in the middle at around £500 in terms of repairs costs that are going to be covered. So I guess from a housing association perspective, when we assess the viability of new homes under the new model, we have to assume some level of repairs take up, which of course clearly means that in financial terms, the tenure isn't going to work as well as it currently does when we don't have that responsibility. And then you've got to add on to that the admin burden, actually processing repairs claims from residents, assessing whether they fall within the criteria that we would have to pay for them, trying to wheel out ones that don't, responding to residents probably in writing. There's a whole sort of admin cost that sits around that, and an increase in management fee that would need to be charged and assumed within our investment appraisals. So I guess the way I think about sort of development investment appraisals is you have two columns. You have a sort of money in, which is your income, and you have your money out, which is your costs and expenditure. And of course, what we're dealing with this first change to the repairs is a bigger debit on the costs out for the housing association, so a bigger cost to us. So I guess alongside that, we've got some other changes which are now going to affect the income side of that equation. So the second major change with the new model is the potential option to buy shares as low as 10%. And again, I think from my perspective, it's going to be interesting, I think, to see what the demand will be for very low shares and whether buyers will meet affordability criteria. And there's the whole issue around, whether we're potentially creating marginal homeowners and what that might be in terms of, issues around sustainability, issues around arrears, issues around potential evictions when things go wrong or people lose their jobs if they're in marginal, employment sectors. I think there's also the issue around whether there will be an appetite from the lending market for very low shares. And certainly, again, what I'm hearing when I talk to lenders is there isn't much appetite. So again, remains to be seen whether we're going to see a big uptake in low shares or not moving forward. But I guess one of the issues is we actually don't know, and that just creates risk. So, I mean, again, what we're doing, if you look at those two sides of the equation, income in and money out, we're potentially with the first change of repairs seeing more money out from the housing association. With the second change of potential of lower shares, you're seeing less income come in. So we're being hit with those two changes on both sides. And I think, it'd be interesting to see, I guess, what the impact of low shares and also housing associations taking responsibility for repairs might have on resident psychology, and whether they start to see themselves as more of a tenant than an owner-occupier, and then what that might mean in terms of future staircasing profiles. Because I do question whether people that buy lower shares will ever staircase. I mean, if you buy a 10% share in a property, will you ever be in a financial situation which would enable you to staircase out to 100% ownership? I mean, certainly with the research that we've done, we found that people that buy 25% shares currently are less likely to staircase than people who buy 50% shares or 75% shares. And again, all of that contributes to affecting the financial viability of shared ownership moving forward. And I think it will also be interesting to see whether those that buy lower shares and are accepting the repair service from a housing association, whether they'll expect a more traditional landlord-tenant type relationship moving forward than we currently see with most shared owners, because most shared owners, I think, see themselves as owner-occupiers. So again, we could be seeing a change of dynamic, and of course, with that change of dynamic and more call on our services, we see more cost. And then there's the third major change, which is the proposal to introduce micro staircasing. So that's the ability for shared owners to buy shares as low as 1%. And that's going to be based on an agreed valuation that we're going to have to issue out to shared owners on an annual basis. So there's a lot of discussion ongoing at the moment as to how that valuation will be worked out, on what basis we'll set that valuation, and then how that will be communicated to residents. And again, I think it'd be interesting to see whether there's much take up in these very, very small staircasing tranches. I suspect not. I mean, I think although there's a suggestion that there's going to be less opportunity for housing associations to charge our own internal costs for staircasing, the shared owner will still have to pay the legal costs, and whether that makes financial sense for them if they're buying very low shares, I'd argue not. So I don't think we're likely to see many people buying these really small shares. And then so they're the three sort of major changes that we're likely to see in shared ownership. And there are going to be some other proposed tweaks around the edges. So there's a suggestion that there's a reduction in the period in which housing associations are required to find a buyer for a shared ownership property. So currently that sits either 8 weeks or 2 months ordinarily. And the suggestion is that that's dropped to 4 weeks. And I guess the risk for the affordable housing sector is if we can't identify a buyer within 4 weeks, then that property will therefore be sold on the open market, and there'll be a loss to the affordable, sort of net loss to the affordable housing sector. So I think that's something that we need to be concerned about. I think there's also some discussion around how repairs claims are going to be made, and whether, if we settle on a sort of £500 a year repairs allowance, whether any of that allowance is unused can be rolled year on year, right to the end of the 10-year period. So you're basically building up your credit. So there's a whole question about whether that should be introduced. But then, you know, how do you administer that as a housing association? How do you check repairs that are being reported? How do you ensure that invoices that you might receive for repairs are correct, that the work has been carried out, that the work has been carried out by a competent person, that there's no fraud? I mean, to me, it's a massive administrative burden on housing associations coming our way. And of course, again, all of that equals cost, and all of that affects viability. So I guess overall, with the proposed changes, I think we've got some key things to think about. I think firstly, will shared ownership under this new model be less viable because of the increased cost and reduced income? So therefore make it less attractive for housing associations to develop. And I think a challenge for those of us that work in development is what assumptions we use. So, you know, currently shared ownership has been around for over 30 years. So we pretty much have a good idea about how it behaves when people staircase, for example, what the admin costs are, what the management costs are. But with this new model, we're going to have to take a bit of a flyer and make some assumptions about how these things are going to work. You know, what the take up of repairs is likely to be, how many people are likely to buy these low equity shares, what the staircasing profile might be, for example. So that's the first one. And I guess it leads on to the second one, which, if there is a reduced viability, will there be a request from housing associations for more grant? And I'm hearing this from a lot of my colleagues at other housing associations. You know, there's this view, well, if our costs go up, what we'll do is we'll approach Homes England or the GLA in London and just say, well, we need more grant. We need a doubling of the grant rate. Well, I'm not convinced that's likely to happen in the environment in which we're currently working. If it does, great on one hand, but if it does, that will reduce the amount of grant that's available. Therefore, it will have an impact on the quantum of affordable housing that's delivered. If we don't get it, then it will affect housing associations' appetite to develop shared ownership in any great number. So that's going to be quite an interesting development to watch out for. So then, will the changes lead to an overall reduction in housing association development capacity of any tenure? Because of course, you know, if everybody's reducing the amount they're developing because they've got less appetite for shared ownership, you know, how are we going to meet the chunky targets that we've been set by government in terms of the amount of affordable housing the country delivers year on year? I think the other thing to think about is, will shared owner behaviour, I should say, change in terms of how we view them and how they view themselves, and where they see themselves, as I say, on this continuum between a sort of owner-occupier and a tenant. You know, will we see a swing towards the sort of tenant end of the spectrum? And then the other thing that I've been mulling over is, will we start to see a two-tier system being created? Because of course we've currently got between us thousands, hundreds of thousands of shared owners. We have resales under the existing model come to the market all the time. These are going to have to be looked at by potential buyers and by ourselves, alongside those that live in the new model, live in shared ownership properties under the new model. And that's going to be quite an interesting thing for us to tackle, I think. You know, you're going to have different shared owners under different models with different rights. And I think, you know, there's even questions about whether there's going to be differential in terms of valuations. You know, you could argue with a shared ownership property where there's a 10-year obligation on the landlord to provide repairs, whether that property would have a higher value than a property that may be next door on the existing model. So again, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. And then I think lastly, you know, how we're going to communicate that and how we're going to manage that within our organisations, and how do we justify the difference between the two models when we invariably receive complaints. So I think alongside this, I was only going to briefly touch on right to shared ownership, because of course that's the other tenure that's being brought in along with the 2021-26 programme. And I think, you know, it's going to be interesting to see, you know, what the take up of right to shared ownership is likely to be. I think it's going to be pretty low, to be honest, because clearly there isn't going to be a discount the way the model is currently being described. So in my mind, you know, an existing tenant buying a 10, 15, even 25% share in their existing property is basically going to be signing up to additional monthly costs. Could be a doubling of monthly costs, but for no real discernible benefit. I mean, of course, they'd have the potential of equity growth on their percentage share, but over and above that, in my mind, if it was me, I'm not sure I'd be taking a shared ownership option. But then I guess the other side of the coin is you might see some people using it as a sort of right to buy by proxy, because you can get people who go in at day one, buy a 50 or 75% share, and then within 6 months buy that property outright. So, you know, that would obviously give us the same concerns that the voluntary right to buy has in terms of leakage of affordable housing from the sector, and the propensity for potential fraud. So, you know, I think these are some of the challenges that we may be faced with. So I guess, you know, what I've described here with all these changes is a massive amount of uncertainty. And in my mind, always, you know, increased uncertainty equals increased risk. And obviously, if housing associations, any developer sees increased risk, it makes them step back and think, is this the right thing to do, and wait for things to settle down. So I'm really worried that you take these changes alongside all of the potential building safety costs that we're all going to be faced with, and the costs to bring homes to, you know, the right sustainability standards and zero carbon by 2050. You take all of these changes, all of these calls on housing associations' resources into account. My fear is what we're going to see is a dip off, at least in the short to medium term, of the number of affordable homes that housing associations deliver. So I realise that's a bit of a whistle-top tour. I didn't want to dwell too much on the intricate detail, but happy to go into more detail or answer any questions.
Wonderful, thank you, Steve. That was really, really good. I think we're going to go into our breakout rooms again just to discuss what you've taken us through. Hopefully we'll be all with different people, so you get to meet other board members, and then we'll come out, and then hopefully you've got loads of questions ready and waiting for us. So yeah, I think this is where my fabulous assistant Emmeline comes into play, and she's going to send us into the rooms.
Okay, here we go.
Yay. just wait for everyone to come back. So I did this last time. I was too keen, and loads of people missed. So I'm gonna wait a little while, wait for everyone to come in. Is everyone back, Emmeline? Am I safe to go?
I think so.
Yay! Okay. So that was our last networking session on the breakout room. So now we're ready for those questions that you've got for Steve, and I'm sure Steve is ready for them. I can see him ready and waiting. So yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. It's on the little reactions tab on the bottom of the screen, and then if you just go up, it says raise hand. So who would like to have a question? No one? Oh, Sandra, go on, Sandra.
Right, sorry, I didn't see my reactions button because I'm on my iPad, so apologies, I've used my hand. Thanks, Lauren. We had some really good discussions in our breakout. Firstly, following on from what Teresa was saying, in terms of building safety and some of the complexities around that, and how we will then have to kind of rethink about some of the technical requirements in recruitment. So it stretches far wider than the immediate. And then we were chatting about some of the things that Steve has said. And Steve, I find that fascinating actually in terms of the customer profile and the psychology, because obviously Steve and I work within the industry, so we do know that shared owners have a particular way in terms of how they like to be addressed. Will that mean, Steve, that the landlord-tenant relationship will become more of a traditional one if the repairs are then taken on by the landlord?
Thanks, Sandra. Yeah, I mean, I do think that probably is a likely sort of unintended consequence of this. So I'm getting a bit of feedback. Can you hear me properly?
Yeah, I can hear you, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I do worry that, yeah, it is an unintended consequence of these changes. And I think, you know, almost we're going to end up, I feel, with a sort of quasi-tenure that sits somewhere between sort of affordable rent, 80% of market, and the sort of low equity shed owner buyers. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see how eventually that settles. And I'm interested in Teresa's view on this, you know, how that might eventually settle legally, because you end up with this sort of quasi-tenancy leasehold type position. Of course, we've spent decades and decades defining how landlord and tenant works, how the wording within tenancy agreements are interpreted, and similarly with leases. So, you know, I fear that we're going to go down that road a little bit.
And it's interesting because Marie in our group said something similar, and she said, I wonder if there's a model in the middle, you know, whether there's any kind of opportunities to think about actually a new model now. Is that something that could be on the table for the future?
The honest answer is I don't know. I think there might be a drift that way. The problem is, and this has always been the fear, that if you start to tweak the shared ownership model too much, you make lenders nervous. And the minute you make lenders nervous and it becomes too much of a niche product, they'll walk away because it becomes too onerous, too complicated, and too expensive for them to administer. So, you know, we need to be careful that we don't tweak it and change it too much.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Steve.
I had my mute on. That's a good point. If nobody has any more questions, I mean, how was your discussions in your groups? I mean, I don't want to pick on anyone. I don't know if Sam's here, who is in my group. I can't see her, but she had some really good points. Where are you? I can see you in the top corner. You're on mute, Sam. I didn't know whether you wanted to. Sam, you're on mute. I'll tell you what, I think I can unmute you. Oh no, Emmeline, can you
mute? I'm here. I'm here. Sorry. Yeah, my concern, as I said to the group, I'd hope that Steve would dispel a lot of the things that I'd read into it the first time round, because I read it and thought, oh good God, this is a logistical nightmare. And for me, it's the actual management of this whole process. You know, the new tenancy agreements, the way that we actually word them, the monitoring of the repairs service, what constitutes a well done repair. Are we going to have to send in sort of secondary repairmen to double check the quality of the first repairman who's been in? The idea of the snowball effect on the, you know, they're up to £750 claim a year terrifies me. Does that mean people will just save it all up and try and get a new boiler at the end of the 10 years? There's just so many logistical issues in relation to the day-to-day management of these cases. I'm hoping that the 1% purchase, people don't go for that on the grounds that the legal fees will probably outweigh the 1% purchase. But who knows? It's just... for me, it's the whole monitoring process that will need to be put in behind the scenes, and how can we potentially recoup some of those costs, because they're all additional costs to housing associations like the one I work for.
Yeah, I mean, I share those concerns, as I said in the presentation. You know, I think administratively it's a real burden and a real nightmare. I think communication is going to be critically important right at the very start when we market you know, the product under the new model, but all the way through, and then also the communication with our teams, our staff, because they're going to be juggling, you know, queries from existing shared owners with queries from new shared owners, and you can imagine, you know, you end up in this sort of, you know, adversarial relationship, you know, which is going to be tricky to handle and tricky to manage. Residents' expectations. And I guess the other concern I've got is there's going to be a lot of abortive costs, if you like. So a lot of people who might make an additional, you know, make a claim for a repair, or think that they might want to micro staircase, and you know that will trigger action internally, and you know, things that we need to do internally, and it might end up going nowhere. You know, we end up with, you know, having to send letters backwards and forwards, all of which is cost to us in the housing association. And you know, of course, you know, the housing association pound still remains the housing association pound, and isn't going to increase. So therefore, if we're spending more on admin, more on IT systems, more on staff, therefore we are spending less on maintenance of our existing homes, less on new homes delivery. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's that part of the pie that's gonna shrink.
We've got two questions, one from Louise and one from Armstead. But just before we just need these last ones, just because we're running out of time. I think I moved on to someone else, and I was like, oh. So Louise, you go next, and then let us know.
Thanks, Lauren. Sorry, I'm trying to mute and unmute. It was just a point that we had quite a lot of good conversation about, you know, how a lot of this there's a lot of additional costs, as Steve and everyone else has been saying, to the housing associations, but there's some positives to the tenants in terms of, you know, potentially where are you going to get those tenants coming from? Is it sort of the market renters? It does provide some additional security of tenure, which I thought was a really interesting point. But from my point of view, and I'm sort of a banking lawyer, so I do social housing banking work. And someone else has already mentioned that sort of you've got the lenders, and whether the lenders will actually be interested in offering a product to enable these kind of purchases. But there's also the other side from the lender's point of view, which is the funding for the housing association. So the lenders to the housing associations themselves have always looked at social housing, at shared ownership, and limited the amount within that they'll lend against to sort of 10-20% of the portfolio, and that's also going to be thrown out of kilter at the, you know, with this new product coming in, and so that's going to create more uncertainty for the housing association funders, which then puts different pressure again on sort of costs and viability, and sort of, you know, it's the unknown. So it's just reducing the housing association pound, as you so nicely put it, Steve, and it's just another pressure on the other side. So not so much a question, just a comment, really.
I mean, I'd agree with that, Louise, and it's certainly something we've been looking at internally, because often one of the biggest constraints on housing associations is our security pool. So, you know, how we secure the value of the security of our stock. And not only do we need to worry about the impact on the valuation of shared ownership, but I think that the fear is that the right to shared ownership could see lenders looking at the rented products as a shared ownership unit rather than a rented unit. Therefore, it's worth less in the security pool.
Yeah, and then because we don't know what the likely take up of that is going to be, it's really hard for them to model, or for you to fight back and say actually it's still not a shared ownership. It should be viewed as a rented product. I mean, you won't know that for a while, so it's quite hard to fight back against.
Oh, thank you. Amarjit, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I just wanted to find out, Steve, have you done any value for money studies? So when you look at your product of shared ownership, when you look at market rent and you look at any other kind of, have you checked to see that do people end up paying more for a shared ownership product than they would in the private sector renting a property?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, we do. One of the things that we need to look at is what other options purchasers potentially have. So that's part of our compliance towards our charitable objectives. So we need to show that actually the shared ownership is a better option rather than buying outright and rather than private renting, and that the costs are in the right position, if you like. I mean, ordinarily in our assessments, costs of shared ownership are normally pitched. So this is rent plus mortgage, normally about 75% of the cost of outright purchase. Now, of course, over the years you see rent increase, but actually the rent increase is relatively shallow. So it's an RPI plus 0.5% increase year on year. But there will be a point clearly where those lines cross. So where shared ownership becomes more expensive than outright sale, but it's a long way down the line, ordinarily.
I guess the other thing is, you said rent and you said mortgage, but there are other add-on costs as well with shared ownership, and are those taken into consideration?
Well, I mean, I guess what you're thinking about is service charges.
And repair costs as well.
Yeah, but I mean, they will be the same. Shared service charge costs and repairs costs will be the same if you were a shared owner or if you're an outright owner. There ordinarily isn't much of a difference. You pay for cleaning, gardening, lighting of communal hallways, that type of thing. You'd also make your contribution to the fabric of the building and the sort of sinking fund costs. So you make those costs. The same
you rent privately, you don't. That's the big thing. I think the big disparities between market rent and shared ownership, that's where the big disparity is. The cost is significantly higher for shared ownership in comparison when you look at the whole cost.
I guess it's difficult with market rent, private rent, because of course the rent increase will be based on the local market in the particular location. So, in high demand locations, you could see that rent increase 10%, 5% on an annual basis, or you might not see it increase at all. So it's quite difficult to talk about absolutes. And I guess the difference and what the sort of detractor from private rent always is the fact that it's not a secure tenure. And we know that most of the market rent market is buy-to-let landlords. And you don't know from one 6-month or 12-month period to the next whether that landlord's going to decide to pull the rug, sell that property, let it to someone else, move in there themselves, whatever. So I guess you're balancing the cost up against security, is my view anyway.
Well, that was, thank you both. I'm now going to pass over to our chair of the South East region, Melissa Woodall.
Don't worry, I'm not going to be very long. I mean, follow that, guys. How informative was that session? I'm just going to say as a very, very quick overview. I think one thing that's really, really clear is there's lots and lots of change happening. Increased change, increased uncertainty, increased risk, decrease in decision making, maybe. Who's to say? But I think we certainly know who to go for any further questions. So I was very, very, very lucky that in both of my groups, I'm sure everyone will agree, in the networking groups, I was surrounded by really intelligent people. So straight away, I just want to say thank you to both of those groups that I was involved with. Really great questions. And I think it's quite clear from being involved in the networking that this is the first of many, many sessions around these two topics in particular. So we might very well be asking you back for a third time, Teresa, and you might be coming back for a second, Steve. But first of all, I just want to say thank you both so much to the two of you for hosting us today and for speaking about the topics that we provided. So thank you very much to you. If anyone wants to do an emoji clap, there we go, Sarah, well done. You're already there. And then I just wanted to wrap up by sort of saying, if the Wish board, the South East board, could all do a bit of a wave so that everyone kind of gets an idea of who the Wish South East board are? There we go. Christina's now joined the board. Just to let you know as well, we'll have some feedback surveys coming out. The context of this event was slightly different to some others that we've done, so less PowerPoints, more face-to-face. So we'll be sending out a feedback survey after this event to gauge if that was good, bad or indifferent, and we will always flex and mould to suit what our members would like. My final thank yous around the sponsors and partners. I've got a list, so bear with me, guys, but Waits, Lovell, Calford Seedon, JLL, PRP, Capsticks, Greenacre, Civitas, Connecting, Resource, Howell Bellis, and Cowell to Kell. So I know a lot of you actually are on the call, hence why I wrote out the full list, because I wanted to make sure I included all of you. And our next event is going to be on Tuesday, the 18th of May. It's going to be from 1 till 3 again. We may change this time if we get feedback stating that this time of the day didn't work for you. And that event will be with Emma O'Shea, who's the Group Customer Services Director for Asda, and Jane Ashcroft, the CEO from Anchor Hanover. And they'll be talking about the importance of the grey pound and the new expectations for customer service in a digital age. I think COVID, if nothing else, has raised the bar in terms of expectations of IT, digital, and how we communicate. So thank you so much to all of you for coming, and have a lovely day.